Afternoon, Miny. Can you hear me?
Hello, yes, I can hear you and see you.
Thank you.
Hi, Miny. Can you?
Hi. Hello, Julie. Yes, I can hear you and see you as well.
Right,
Thank you. Hello, Mr. Crossley. Could you turn your camera off, please?
Hello, good afternoon everyone, and welcome to the Stage 3 hearing sessions on the Calderdale Local Plan. Before we begin, I just need to do a quick sound and vision check with the Programme Officer. Miny, can you confirm, can I be seen and heard?
Hello, Inspector. Yes, I can see you and hear you.
Thank you very much. For the benefit of those who I haven't met to date, my name is Katie Child. I'm a Chartered Town Planner and a Planning Inspector, and I've been appointed by the Secretary of State to conduct the examination of the Calderdale Local Plan. Welcome this afternoon to all the participants who are on the Zoom call, and also to anyone who may be watching on the Council's YouTube channel. The Stage 3 hearings are being held this week over 3 days and will all be hosted online via Zoom because of the COVID-19 restrictions. And these follow on from the Stage 2 hearings that were held at the end of last year because the Council has completed a number of new evidence documents and produced additional information which needs to be discussed. So in terms of the session this afternoon, this afternoon's session we'll be looking at education infrastructure, and this is as set out in document CC 121 in the examination library. The discussion would be based on the agenda before us. I hope everyone has a copy in front of them. If you don't, there is a copy of the agenda on the Council's examination website, so please refer to that. The main purpose of the session is to find out more, for me to find out more about certain issues on which I feel I need more information. It's also an opportunity, obviously, for you to express your views and make comments. In terms of how the session this afternoon will run, it will take the form of a structured discussion based on the agenda. I will usually start each topic with some specific questions for the council and then invite contributions from other participants. When I allow contributions, then you'll need to press the raise hand button on the right hand side to indicate that you wish to speak. And when you are invited to speak, you'll need to remember to turn on your camera and your microphone as well. And then once you've finished speaking, remember to turn those off and also to lower your hand. Just to say, I've already read representations and evidence documents, so there's no need to repeat everything in those. You may just wish to highlight some key points. A couple of practicalities and timing matters. In terms of timing, I propose we will take an afternoon break at some stage, at a suitable point in the agenda, around 3:30-ish, and I would aim to finish the session by 5 o'clock. If you wish to film or record the session, then please note you will need to comply with relevant data protection legislation. Rather than going round and introducing each other at this stage, could I ask that the first time that you speak in the discussion, at that point, you say your name and your organisation and your interest. Having said that, can I please just check with the council who is leading on the discussion for you this afternoon?
Good morning, ma'am. Richard Seaman, lead for planning at Calderdale. It will be my colleague, Mr. Richard Morse.
Thank you very much. And are there any practical points you need to make, Mr. Seaman? Any practical housekeeping matters?
No, there aren't. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and does anyone else have any other practical questions that they wish to raise about the running of the session before we get onto the main agenda? If so, then please raise your hand now. No, okay. So if we move on then to item number 2, which is an update on the Brighouse Secondary School provision. And my question starting off for the council is, obviously there's been an application for a free school to serve the Brighouse area. Can you just give me the latest update position on that, please?
Yes, that answer is actually coming from myself rather than Mr. Morse, although Mr. Morse would obviously be just as capable of responding. So the application from the Trinity Multi-Academy Trust to construct a free school in South East Calderdale was successful. The next steps is that the identification of a site and the subsequent delivery has been passed to an organisation called Located. As I understand the situation, Located is a company that belongs to the Department for Education, and when a free school application is successfully applied to funding from the DFE, they are brought in to deal with all of the land and delivery issues. So Located are currently liaising with both the Multi-Academy Trust and the council. Mr. Morse is actually the lead point of contact within the council on that project, although I am also involved. As at today, a preferred site has not yet been identified, but we are meeting with Located on a regular basis.
Okay, thank you. I mean, obviously you say that a preferred site hasn't been identified, but are you looking at any sites that have implications for allocations in the plan?
Not that, no. I mean, I've not. The last meeting I was involved with Located was several weeks ago, and I think they were still at a sort of long list position there. I think that started to narrow down but it won't be, I think, until next week when we meet them again. But I'm not aware that it's sites that have implications for the plan. I think the approach that Located take is to focus on the sort of the most easily deliverable sites. That's their sort of preferred position, but I'm not aware that clearly the reason that I'm involved with the process is that I can feed back planning advice and identify at an early stage if there are implications for the plan. So it's what's the word, a process of close communication at the moment.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification. Can I ask then if anyone else has any comments on the issue of secondary school provision in Brighouse and what Mr. Seaman has just said? If so, please raise your hand. Okay, a couple of people. So firstly, Mr. Carlton, if you'd like to turn on your camera and introduce yourself.
Good afternoon, ma'am. Jason Carlton. I'm an individual participant. Some of this has already been posed, and I don't think we've actually had any satisfactory answers yet. There were several issues that came out from this free school application, which was a late entry, shall we say, into the plan last year. And it was certainly a late entry because we started out with a dedicated school, a secondary school on the Thornhill site that was in the 2016 South East Calderdale vision. We then moved to increasing the capacity at two existing secondary schools at Rastrick and Brighouse High. And then inexplicably, we find ourselves the lucky recipients of a free school bid. And ma'am, at no point have we actually had a rational explanation for how this position has moved. This to me is yet another example of the evidence changing. I'm back to nailing jelly on the wall, and this is a classic example to me. We start out with a vision, and whether or not you subscribe to the garden suburb plan, at least everything was in one place. We then move from that, and by the way, in that vision, it would have been funded by the developer. No argument, because it was entirely developer-led. We then moved to a position where we're putting the burden on existing schools, and I wasn't clear the transport modelling and before we get onto air quality, whether that had been suitably addressed. We've now gone from that to another position, and yet we still don't even know where this is. So what's the air quality implications? I know we're going to come back to that. What's the modelling? How does that justify about our climate emergency? I find to be in this position at this point unacceptable. I do wonder if, ma'am, you might invite Mr. Seaman or the council to explain how they feel that we can justify having a free school application when it's quite clear from the trajectory. It's easy for you to say that word. From the trajectory that the demand for this is now driven by the exponential increase in that this plan is covering. We do not need this if it weren't for the plan increases. So I'm intrigued why they think that we should benefit from a free school application. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, thank you for your comments, Mr. Carlton. I don't have any questions on that particular issue for Mr. Seaman at present time, but I've noted your points. Mrs. Bullin, good afternoon. Would you like to turn your camera on and introduce yourself?
Yes, ma'am, thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Julie Bullen. I'm a member and I'm here representing the Woodhouse Residents Association, who have an interest in the Woodhouse Garden Suburb and the wider Brighouse developments. I agree with the comments that Mr. Carlton's just made. The point that I wanted to make was just really to clarify the position with the free school. Because as I understand it, it has to cross a number of hurdles before it can actually go ahead. I understand that conditions often relate to the offer letter that's being given, and that any failure to meet any of the conditions would mean that it would be unlikely that the Secretary of State would be willing to enter into a funding agreement with the particular trust. I have noted that a number of these free schools fail through the process. So you know, I mean, there's still some way to go, I think, in terms of that. And I just wondered if there was any sort of, I was just really clarifying that position, really. That was my point. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So you've got a detailed question about the process and the different stages. Okay, Mr. Seaman, I can see you've got your hand up. So if you'd like to come back on anything that anyone has said, and then perhaps pick up that last point, if you have that information, that is.
Yes, I will come back on the more general points raised by Mr. Carlton, and then pass to Mr. Morse, who may be able to say something more about the detailed proposal. I think just to clarify, the free school application to the Department for Education was made by the Trinity Multi-Academy Trust and promoted by them. It wasn't instigated by the council, and obviously they submitted the bid at the point the opportunity arose to bid for the construction of a free school. They are obviously a very, very successful multi-academy trust with a good reputation, and they've got schools in Calderdale and further afield. But the lead in this was the trust. So I don't think it's accurate to portray the free school as part of the local plan. It's not being promoted through the local plan. However, it is something that has an impact on the local plan. It remains the case that obviously Calderdale, the council, has explored the propositions around the potential expansion of Brighouse High School and Rastrick High School. We've provided evidence in connection with that at the previous stage of hearings, ma'am. We've done work in relation to the costings of that, and we've undertaken feasibility work. But what I will say is that the Multi-Academy Trust submitting the successful bid for the free school has created a further opportunity in terms of delivering school places, and clearly it does have advantages in terms of those places not having to be funded through Section 106 in the way the expansion of the existing high schools would have had to have been done. But as I say, we have also considered the financial viability of the expansion of the existing secondary schools. So I feel very much it's about, and I think Mr. Morse will probably return to this issue, with provision of school places, it's very much about having multiple options to pursue. But I think that's all I have to say. As I say, Mr. Morse may be able to provide more clarity on the actual sort of process going forward. I'm not sure. I might have just put him on the spot. So.
Okay. Yes, Mr. Morse, if you can turn on your camera, please, and introduce yourself.
Yes, certainly. Thank you, and good afternoon. I'm Richard Morse from Calderdale Council. I'm the Senior Commissioning Officer for Children and Young People Services, and I'm responsible for pupil place planning. So in terms of process, yeah, I think Mr. Seaman's pretty much covered most of it. The Trinity Academy bid was a bid from a multi-academy trust. There are national rounds for bidding, and they took the opportunity to submit a bid and were successful. And in some ways, that's a welcome development because, as previously mentioned, that saves us having to commission those places locally, and does bring a substantial amount of funding in that otherwise we would have to have found locally. So the next stage is located or identifying a site. Once that site has been identified, we then move to the next phase with the DFE around procurement. So procurement, I would say, from planning to delivery is going to be a minimum two year thing. It needs very much to be tied in with the local plan in terms of the delivery of the new housing and the arrival of the additional need. So we're keen to work with the department to ensure that happens, because we don't want a scenario where we build surplus places into the system and potentially put underperforming schools elsewhere at risk. What could potentially happen in that scenario is there is an exodus of pupils from an existing provider, and we don't want to see that happen, because we would then, when the housing does arrive, if a school were, for argument's sake, to close, we will be back in the situation we are now of not having sufficient provision to meet the additional need anticipated from the new homes.
Okay, thank you very much. That assists. Mr. Carlton, you've got your hand up again. Did you wish to come back?
I do, ma'am, and I'm mindful of not having a backwards and forwards debate on this. But if I've understood what the council have just told you is correct, what they're saying is, and it's timing's everything, isn't it? That miraculously the Trinity Multi-Academy Trust decided to submit a speculative bid just at the time they've then dropped their ideas for pursuing additional development on two existing sites. Whether it's convenient or not, the reality is that we're now depending on this bid being successful, because it would appear that everything else has been shelved. And it still doesn't answer the points. To me, this is a fundamental underpinning of what this plan's trying to do. And I don't know how you feel about this, ma'am, but to be in the position where we're relying on another stream of funding for something that's yet unproven, and looking at the way the viability has gone, I have some doubts about this now, but I'm sure we'll be debating that again.
Okay, thank you. And Mrs. Bullen.
Yes, thank you, Mel. Obviously, we have provided quite a bit of information in our statements about this, but it's really in terms of the government guidance that's out there in terms of funding garden community, established need for secondary provision or any provision really. So just to say that I know that both Mr. Morse and Mr. Seaman have said that there won't be any cost, but that's not what the government guidance is saying. So I just wanted to make that point.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, I don't have any further questions. Mr. Seaman, did you wish to say something finally on the secondary school issue?
Yes, just very quickly to, I think I said it previously, but just to clarify for Mr. Carlton, the expansion of the existing secondary schools, those remain as an option. The council has multiple options for the delivery of secondary school spaces. Clearly, the one that's preferred from a financial point of view is the Multi-Academy Trust, but there remains the option of the existing school expansions.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, I think that probably completes item number 2. Let's move on to item 3, which is meeting future school needs in the North Halifax area. I've just got a couple of questions for the council, and then if anyone else wishes to chip in after that, that's fine. So under bullet point 1, I've said, where will additional primary provision be made? I mean, just don't expect an exact answer, because I appreciate that that exact work may not have been done, but what sort of work have you been doing to look at potential options in the North Halifax area for accommodating that? Are you able to give me any reassurance that there is capacity somewhere?
Yes, certainly. Perhaps if I give a little context to the local authorities' duties around sufficiency of provision. we are obliged to ensure that there are enough pupil places in at any one time, but that's not necessarily the same as an obligation to provide that provision. So we will procure it. But in terms of the educational landscape, there are a mix of council managed and maintained schools and autonomous schools such as academies. So we have a relationship to manage, if you like, a symbiotic relationship with others. And of course, with that brings some sensitivities around management of those relationships. Effectively, we have a competitive market now and competing education providers. So it's not within our gift to pick a school, name a school, without further sort of consultation and negotiation work with the learning community. So if we sound a little vague, we're not. We certainly have plans and feasibilities underway in terms of what the solution might look like. But we are, for obvious reasons, not in a position to actually name specific solutions at this stage until we've run those processes that are necessary to actually narrow down the partner that we're working with. But the two elements then, the two phases for secondary school provision in North Halifax, there is land in local authority ownership that would lend itself to a solution here and allow the additional places that are required. As mentioned, we've not identified a partner, but we've more than one option there, and we will embark on a consultation with secondary schools in the not too distant future. We also have a plan B. We don't like to have all eggs in one basket, and we're exploring potentially land that's currently available for acquisition, but not in the local authority ownership. It is a plan B, and it's not the preferred option because obviously that will bring additional costs. And we would rather invest the capital investment into the buildings rather than acquiring additional land. And for primary, indeed, we've again got land that's currently in local authority ownership, and there are two schools in particular that lend themselves to expansion, and we will obviously progress with those options. And ensure that we time any potential expansion with the delivery of new housing and the increased demand.
Okay, thank you for that useful clarification regarding what options there may be in the area, but also the sort of the general process as well. Okay, thank you. Does anyone else wish to comment on the issue of schools in the North Halifax area? If so, please raise your hand now. No, okay. Right, let's move on then to item number 4 on the agenda. And this is primary pupil projections in Lightcliffe and Shelf and meeting future needs. And this stems from a comment made by the Hipper Home and Lightcliffe Ward Planning Group. This is their representation, where they have suggested that the projection figure for Lightcliffe Primary School may be different to what is in CC 121. So there's a capacity figure of 420 for the school. In year 2020-21, it's showing a pupil figure of only 179. Could the council just sort of explain that for me, and then I'll obviously give an opportunity for anyone else to comment on that.
Yes, apologies. That was an error on my part. I've overtyped the figures from Cliff Hill School. You'll notice they match the line above. So that was an error on my part. It does mean that the half form of entry is more likely to be a whole form of entry that's required there. And similarly to the answer for North Halifax, we do have schools in mind, but we would not wish to sort of name them at this stage. But there are schools that have a sufficient land and capacity to be expanded by that extent.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. Does anyone else wish to comment then on the issue of Light Clifton Shelf Primary School provision and those figures in the work? Mr. Crossley, would you like to turn your camera on, please, and introduce yourself?
Good afternoon, Inspector Brian Crossley, Shelford North Arham Local Plan Forum. It's interesting that Mr. Morse has just confirmed that the figure for Lightcliff Senior Primary School is incorrect. He didn't give the correct number for 2021. Presumably it's higher than is shown there. Interesting in the fact that looking at CC 121 page 8, which provides lots of charts and figures for Lightcliff, Shelford North Arham, it's fairly obvious that the undersubscription of school places appears to be largely coming from that low figure allocated for Lightcliff Primary School. So if that figure is wrong, the undersubscription is also going to be wrong. Just to put this into a bit of context, there's a current planning application in North Arham for 10 houses. Education Services' response to that is that North Arham Primary School is oversubscribed, and the next nearest school is a 3-mile walk away from that planning site, the planning application site. They don't say whether it's Salterlea or whether it's Shelf GNI. If it's Salterlea, that's an extremely dangerous walk, and that school is also oversubscribed. So possibly it might be Shelf GNI. So just looking at these charts that they've provided in CC 121, seem to have confused the issue for me. It's titled Housing Trajectory for Lightcliff, Shelford North Arham Wards. Shelford North Arham Ward actually includes Claremont. There are no schools listed for Claremont. Lightcliff is not just Lightcliff, it's Hipperholm and Lightcliff. In the summary sheet at the beginning of CC 121, they say that the local plan will take us close to overall capacity or overcapacity, where peaks and troughs occur in certain year groups, or local peaks of demand, such as near the Crossley site, which sits just inside the Brighouse area, but will more likely affect this part of the borough, potentially another half form of entry required here. Why have they just considered the Crossley site? If they're considering Hipperholm and Lightcliff as a ward, there are several other housing sites, proposed housing allocations in that ward, which they don't seem to be considering. Going back to page 8, the bar chart, the bar table at the top, it's got a housing trajectory based over 15 years, which is confusing since we just heard this morning that the council is now looking at 10 years. But nevertheless, that housing trajectory bears absolutely no correlation to the housing trajectory that we've been discussing this morning. It appears to have a total of 1,062 houses in both wards. There are 903 in Shelford North Arham alone. That is a massive underestimate. I don't know where the other sites have gone. The trajectory, the profile of the trajectory itself is way out. For instance, they project in years 11 and 12, 70 houses and 50 houses respectively. And we have got, if I can find my chart, In Shelf and North Aram alone, in year 11, we've got 249, year 11 of the plan, 249, in year 12 of the plan, 266. That's just Shelf and North Aram alone. I think they further confused it by the green table on the left kind of shows primary projections excluding the local plan. And as we've already heard, the Lightcliff Senior Primary School is the incorrect figure anyway. Then when they include the local plan, what's confused me is that they've lumped, or they appear to lump all the schools together and just say, well, we need 7 places in 2021. What it's not clear is where those places are going to be, whether it's Shelf, North Aram, Lightcliff, Hipperholm, wherever. And they've continued the confusion with the blue chart on the right-hand side, on which they've assumed a static population from 2023. I'd welcome some explanation of what that means, a static population. To me, we haven't got a static population when we're building thousands of houses. So the whole picture of school place provision in Shelf and North Aram, and I'm sorry, but I can't really comment on Lightcliff and North Aram because I've not looked at that. My remit is Shelf and North Aram, but the whole picture for school place provision looks confusing. It's confusing me anyway. Perhaps you may understand it, Inspector, but I certainly don't. And looking at the latest IDP, all they talk about for additional provision of school places is the possibility, if required, of some extension to Shelf J and I. There's no provision in North Aram, nor is there any provision or any mention of provision at St Michael and All Angels in Shelf. So I don't really know what to make of that. That series of charts tells me nothing, and it's totally confusing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Crossley. You've obviously raised quite a few points there. Could I ask Mr. Morse if you could respond? I think it would be useful for me if you could respond particularly to 2 of Mr. Crossley's points. The first was just about the boundaries of the ward. He indicated that there were potentially some other schools actually within those ward boundaries, if it's ward boundaries you've used. So firstly, that question. And then secondly, just the links to what housing trajectory has been used. You know, how does it tie in with the latest housing trajectory that we talked about this morning with the council? That's in document CC 125. Okay.
Again, sorry, beg your pardon. If I could perhaps just explain the rationale behind how we've arrived at those figures. Monitoring the pupil population is a job we have to do anyway, regardless of the local plan, to ensure we've got sufficiency of provision. And of course, pupil populations go up, they come down. And there are other influencing factors, migratory factors, economic migration or otherwise. We carry out an exercise each year. So this is an ongoing process. To determine if we need any additional pupil accommodation, regardless of new housing. We will, as an ongoing process, need to update this document annually to reflect that pupil movement, because we have that as the underlying baseline, if you like. And then we have overlaid the impact of the local plan on top of that trajectory. So it kind of follows up and down, but factors in the additional demand we anticipate from new housing. But of course, that is based on averages, and you know, we're not necessarily expecting it to be absolutely nailed on. So we do need to have the flexibility to move with this. Now, in terms of our methodology, we wouldn't normally sort of stick schools in postcodes. There's not a natural marriage between what's going on, I suppose, with the local plan in terms of where the housing's being built in wards and how we project pupil numbers, because that is a system driven by parental preference, and people don't sort of stick in their wards. They choose schools for a variety of reasons. So we tried to marry the two, and we tried to put schools where we felt they best fit with the developments that are going on, and that's why you know, perhaps there's not a complete match there in terms of where you see the schools. So yes, the housing trajectory, you know, as it develops through this, will need to be updated. I'm suggesting rather than a constant update, we do that perhaps on an annual basis when we get the revised figures through from the NHS. And we get live data from the NHS so that we can carry out our projections, births by postcode, and we project that data forward based on historical preferencing patterns. We don't go any further than 4 years for primary, because we're using, obviously that would be preconception, and there's no sensible way of projecting the population other than using, not at a local level anyway, other than using National Audit Office statistics that I think calculate women of a childbearing age and factor in something there in terms of how they arrive at where they feel the population is going forward longer term. Because we're talking about actual taking decisions and investing, we'd rather use on actual data, so live births and pupils that we know are in the system. Now, we appreciate that patterns change, and some might move from school A to school B. A good or bad Ofsted can affect that allocation. But what we're trying to do is look, and this is why we've clumped them together, at the underlying trend in a particular part of the borough and the need for additional places. And when it comes to actually taking those decisions, that's when we narrow down the options and pick the option that's best to meet the need for additional pupils in an area.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, that was a little long-winded.
No, that's fine. That provided quite some useful information for me. Just a follow-up question, really. I wasn't quite clear in terms of housing trajectory. So my question was like, have you used CC 125 figures in your trajectory work here, you know, reflected? Because Mr. Crossley seemed to be saying that he thought the figures were different.
I used the last figures colleagues updated me with. So yeah, I appreciate that probably will need an update, and this is a fluid situation. So we are now at a time of the year this summer when we're almost complete with our other projection work, and we'll use this opportunity to again update this document with the latest housing trajectory. Okay,
so which housing trajectory did you use? Or perhaps it might be for Mr. Seaman to confirm.
Yeah, I'd have to ask colleagues which.
Thank you, Mum. I think the data was actually provided by Mr. Houston earlier this year. So if that's correct, could Mr. Houston confirm?
Yeah, I mean, I've got to say that, hello, good afternoon. I'm not familiar with this data, but just having had a quick look at it, it clearly isn't the latest housing trajectory because it's only got 1 year of completions. And the current trajectory has 2 years of completions. Also, the trajectory is not done on a ward basis. It's done either on a local plan basis or a district basis. The figures produced in CC 125 were on a district-wide basis. So I think they may not be comparable, but certainly looking at this, it's not the latest version of the trajectory because, as I say, we've got completions for at least for the first 2 years in CC 125.
Okay, so where does the data come from then, and which trajectory? Obviously, we've got several versions that we've talked through in the last year or two. Which version does it date from? For example, does it pick up on all the allocations? Probably is the critical question.
Yes, it picks up on all of the allocations. I think we will just need to double check the source that was used. It was the work started, if I recall correctly, towards the beginning of this year. So I think we will just need to check the exact source of the data, but it certainly picks up on all of the allocations, albeit as Mr. Morse explained, it hasn't used quite the same geography as the local plan areas, because it was a case of sort of the appropriate the geography of sort of school sufficiency is a bit different to the geography of local plan areas. But I think we'll just need to confirm the exact data source. Although, as I say, it certainly has included all of the allocations.
Okay. Thank you for that. Yes, if you could just get back to me at some point and just confirm that would be very useful. I'll just make a note of that, so just bear with me. Thank you very much. Okay, next we have Mrs. Bullen. Would you like to turn your camera on, please? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, ma'am. Thank you. Yeah, this might have now passed really, but I just wanted to reiterate and support Mr. Crossley's comments, and just to say that we have picked up as well that there seemed to be a mishmash of different things, because you've got the brick house plan area as one, and then the rest are all by ward area, so it's not consistent across the board really, how they've done it. And certainly in terms of Mr. Crossley's comments, two of the Lightcliffe and Hipperholm schools were shown within the brick house plan area, so that was St Chad's and Bailiff Bridge, just to say that. So they were in that particular ward. Thank you.
Thank you. And next is Mr. Lee. Good afternoon. Would you like to turn your camera on?
Thank you, Madam Inspector. Councillor Stephen Lee, and the leader of the Conservative group on Calderdale Council. Yes, some of the answers have been provided, well, answers have been offered to Mr. Crossley's question. I too am very confused by the numbers in CC 121, completely confused actually. But I'm worried on a slightly different level. I don't know if anybody that's an expert on children and school places has looked at these figures. But going back to the very start of this, the whole plan is predicated on 30,000 people being new migrants, new incomers into Calderdale. And that's the reason we're looking at something like 15,000 houses. In the past, when I've looked at housing statistics, I think it's something like the average residency of a house throughout Britain is about 3.5, where the 0.5 is a child. Something like that. You know, people don't just, 30,000 people don't come here without any children. There'll be lots of children. And if it's of that order, if there's half a child on average in every house, that's over 7,000 children somewhere along the line coming into Calderdale. And the numbers that I'm seeing in those statistics, which has confused Mrs. Bullen as well, all of us, don't seem to be sufficient in number. You know, this is going to involve a lot of children. And, you know, these estimates in some cases are saying that, you know, it might affect the school by 2 places and 3 places here. We're talking about, particularly in the areas in Brickhouse and the garden suburbs, of thousands of houses and potentially thousands of children. So I don't get it at all with these figures, and I wonder who's done them. And it would be good to know however they've been done, and if they are correct, I'd like to see the calculations that are being performed, because I don't believe them. Thank you, Madam Inspector.
Okay, thank you. Right, before the council respond, I'll just take a comment from Mr. Crossley. You've still got your hand up. Did you wish to come back on something that's been said?
Yes, thank you. I did, Inspector. Yeah, I just to confirm to the council that the figures that I quoted for years 11 and 12, and it's a chart that I've got here, covers the whole 15 years, but those figures were from CC 125, the latest version, interrogated today, and I've put them into a chart. So they're as up to date as I can find anyway.
Yes, yes, the council has confirmed that the trajectory used in the pupil work wasn't the latest one, but they're going to get back to me and let me know which version. And there were 2 versions that were produced last year, so I'm assuming it's one of those to be most likely. Okay, does the council wish to come back on anything that's been said by representatives?
I could possibly comment. It's quite a common question that's put to us in terms of the number of houses and the anticipated additional children, and I can see the logic behind the question. But what I would say is, any existing children, if these are families that already have children, then those children they're already in the education system somewhere. So granted, there may be some movement between schools, but overall that's not affecting capacity. So we are looking at the sort of growth over and above the existing pupil population when we look at the new homes. And yes, we do use an average anticipated pupil yield, and we use a figure of 0.36 to calculate how many additional children we feel that new homes will bring us. But I would point out that those children generated go across the whole education system. So there are 7-year groups in primary, of course, and 5-year groups in secondary. So the numbers, once they're spread out across the whole education spectrum, do look to be low compared to the number of houses. But it is in fact, in normal circumstances, it proves to be an effective way to plan places. We acknowledge that housing here is on a far grander scale, and we do need to monitor the situation, and we may need to respond if we don't see what we anticipate and project going forward.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Lee, you've got your hand up. Did you wish to say something else?
Madam Inspector, it was a legacy hand, but I do understand that what's just been said about spreading it over the year groups. But if it's 0.36 of 15,000 houses, you're talking about 4,000 young people, something like that, and spread over the groups of say 6 groups, it's 700 or 800 per year. And the numbers are far more voluminous than I saw in those statistics. That was all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I've got no further questions under item 4. So let's move on to item number 5, which is options for primary provision in the Elland and Greetland area. And the first bullet point I've got on the agenda is what is the council's preferred option for accommodating additional provision in the area? As we've already discussed this afternoon, I'm not looking for sort of the exact answers, but just there's obviously a significant number of different schools, aren't there, in that broad area. What sort of like general sort of options and feasibility work have you looked at? Are there some genuine options out there? Mr. Morse?
Yes, thank you. There are certainly options available to us, and There's also a development in the area regarding one of our academies that has designs on expansion anyway. So we will have to watch that one closely, because if they do expand, then it negates the need for any further intervention with the local authority. And again, with it being an academy and the opportunity to bid for central government funding, it may be that that solution presents itself as the preferred option. But yeah, indeed, we have a longer lead-in time here before we anticipate that a shortage of places in primary is going to be an issue. And there are a number of schools that have sufficient external area that would allow a smaller scale expansion, which we envisage this would be.
Okay. So I'm just scribbling that down. Just bear with me. Okay, so you just referred to one academy wishes to expand. Is that the Greetland Academy, or is this a different one?
It isn't. It's a different one. I think we can say, because I don't think it's a particular secret, but I think Old Earth Academy in the centre of Elland have designs. They have a working relationship with the landowner adjacent to the school, and I think that they are in talks and have some time had designs on potential expansion.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I've obviously received, as part of the examination of the local plan, a letter from Greetland Academy saying that they wish to expand their site. From that letter, it didn't appear necessarily that it was to do with additional primary form entry. It appeared, from the letter, it appears that they were talking about making additional making additional early years provision, and then resolving other capacity issues at the school. That's what the letter says. Are you aware of any, of that position, that issue for that particular school?
Yeah, I think this is where it becomes slightly nuanced in that in terms of what the local authority looked at, it is sufficiency of provision, i.e. not necessarily parental preference for a popular school, but whether we have enough places in an area to serve the pupil population. Popular schools such as Greetland may have designs of their own to expand, and they are autonomous from the local authority, and they can bid as a successful and outstanding school to the government to expand. And that funding will come regardless of whether there's an actual need for additional places, often in an area. And it's the agenda about expanding successful schools. Excuse me.
Okay, but as far as the council is concerned, then that's a separate issue, effectively.
It is almost a separate issue. If it does come that Old Earth don't progress with their plans, then of course we're back to needing to look for a solution locally. And there are a number of options. Greetland could be just one of those options.
Okay. So at this stage, though, the need for expansion of Greetland is not confirmed. Or
it's some time off, yes, before we would actually need to do any work. And again, the underlying population may have changed by the time we get there. So it's probably not a time to take any firm decisions at this point.
Yes. And I assume that when you're looking at the expansion of a school, you look at sort of whether there's capacity within the existing boundaries, for example, going upwards or reusing part of the playground or more intense use before you look at expansion of land outside. Is that correct?
It is, yes. Yeah. Obviously, any acquisition brings with it a cost. And so we try and look at the capital funding we receive from government as carefully as we can and make it go as far as we can, because we've obviously many challenges across the borough. So we don't look to acquire land unless it's absolutely necessary. We would look at solutions through remodelling or expansion on the existing footprint.
One thing that did just strike me about Greetland School is that, as I understand it, it's on a split site.
It is.
So the site on Saddleworth Road, to the south of Saddleworth Road, if that were to expand, obviously that's part of the school, but then I assume there may need to be expansion in the other part of the school to enable those pupils to move through the school years. And is there capacity on the other site? Is it fairly constrained?
There is always a solution. I think it's difficult without getting to a sort of formal feasibility. But yes, potentially both sites would lend themselves to expansion, either through expanding the footprint or as you mentioned before, actually going up a floor. But obviously that's a far more technical and challenging project, and you need the appropriate site investigations to see what solution would lend itself to the budget.
Okay. Thank you for that. Okay, if at this stage then, I've got a couple of further questions, but I think at this stage I'll invite contributions from other participants. I know that the Greetland Pressure Group are here today. They may wish to comment, and other persons too. So if there are any comments at this stage about the pupil projections and the representation in CC 121 about primary provision in Elland and Greetland area, and then also about the issue of the expansion of Greetland Academy itself, which I've just touched on, then please raise your hand now. Miss Ashton, I can see you are first off. Would you like to turn your camera on it and introduce yourself as well?
Good afternoon, my name is Lindsay Ashton. I'm representing Greetland Pressure Group. I'd just like to say that we support Mr. Morse's comment. A lot of the points that I'd set out to raise this afternoon were based on Old Earth being a more suitable option for additional primary provision in the area, given that the Greetland Academy does currently have a number of children attending the academy from Elland, and this is contributing to what we would consider sort of like a crisis situation in West Vale in terms of congestion and air quality. So it would be better if the provision was located in Elland, because then the children from Elland can attend school in Elland, and the places in Greetland, the Greetland Academy could then be offered to children in Greetland, which would accommodate the additional places that would be that would come from the local plan. That was it, thank you. We would like to discuss exceptional circumstances, but I'll hang on until the next point on the agenda.
Okay.
Thank you very much, thank you.
Thank you. And next is Mr. Cook. Good afternoon. Would you like to turn your camera on and introduce yourself?
Yeah, good afternoon, Madam Inspector. I'm Jacob Cook. I'm a councillor for the Greetland and Stainland ward, so I've taken interest in that respect. Also representing Lindsay Ashton, the Greetland Pressure Group. So basically, I wanted just to pick up on something that was just been said by the council with respect to the second school site, the Greetland Academy. That's the one that's up on School Street. So it's the one that you rightly mentioned, Madam Inspector, which is the second site. Now, the council have just said that that would lend itself to expansion. And I must say, I'm shocked they've said that. I mean, if you know that school at all, it's bound on two sides by a road. It's a very small site. It's a Victorian build, it's built in Victorian times. It's a very old building. You would not be able to expand that. And I don't care what the council say about that. And even suggest you might be able to put a second floor on. That's just ridiculous. You never get a second floor on that. So I'm afraid if there is plans to expand Greetland Academy down on Saddleworth Road, for what the council suggests, it's not going to put it, because you're not going to be able to expand the second site, and it's as simple as that. And I think it's a little bit disingenuous of the council to suggest that that is the case. In any event, I think Greetland Academy down on Saddleworth Road, they have suggested that they would like to expand it for their own reasons, which is for early years, to take on early years pupils, and that probably would work at some point, but certainly not in the way the council is suggesting to develop the second site. So I really have to argue strongly against that. If I'm allowed just to move on, Madam Inspector, onto my own points that I wanted to address. Do you want me to address those now, or would you like me to wait until you're talking about exceptional circumstances?
If they're to do with the exceptional circumstances, then I'm just literally going to be coming on to that.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, well, I'll wait then, Madam Inspector, and address those at that point.
I basically want to just get the council's view on that first, and then I'll invite contributions from yourself.
Great, thanks. Thank you.
Okay, next is Mr. Rose. Good afternoon. Would you like to turn your camera on?
Thank you, ma'am. Andrew Rose from Schofield, representing Keyland Developments. It was just a quick note, ma'am, just to emphasise and support. Obviously, in terms of the trajectory that you see before you, ma'am, the need isn't imminent, and I think what you've heard from the council as well is that because of that, there is time to obviously identify what the solution is, and that there are actually a number of options available, ma'am. It's quite good to be in a position, ma'am, that there is actually a number of options available in order to secure the necessary educational needs for the future, ma'am. And clearly, when these sites start coming forward, as can be seen within the trajectories, the need for new places doesn't come immediately. Obviously, people, not every house has, not getting into pupil yields, but obviously, as you know, ma'am, and as you're well experienced, that is the way that councils actually identify what the educational needs are, and therefore that's spread across the 12 school years. Obviously, in this instance, in terms of the 7 primary years, and therefore, not every house is going to generate 2 children, which is in every sort of year group in the primary school. So I think as you can see and take comfort in this, in these trajectories and these scenarios, is that there is time, but also obviously there is one academy actively looking to obviously expand, and also there are other schools in the area which could also expand, and obviously exploring that situation. So I think in this instance, there are a number of scenarios, a number of options, and we actually have time in order to resolve those situations whilst these sites actually come forward, or equally whilst we finish the EIP, get to adoption and work that through the planning system, Mum.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right, next is Mr. Butler. Would you like to turn your camera on, please, and introduce yourself? Thank you.
Good afternoon, ma'am. Thank you. My name's Paul Butler. I'm here on behalf of Barratt Homes and the site ref LP0177. And I just wanted to quickly just reiterate, reconfirm our offer to facilitate land if required from the site. As you're aware, the net developable area is reduced now, so the ability is there for that land if needed. Just come back on a quick point that was referenced in the session from this morning in terms of trajectory and delivery. We're still very committed to getting an application in the first year of the plan. What that does bring with it, of course, is the ability for the land to be offered for the school much sooner as well. So we'll work with the council to understand what Mr. Morse is saying in terms of when that might be required and if required. So what we'd end up doing is through the 106, we'd have trigger points in there in terms of when that land would be offered and remained on offer. And what we'll do is ensure that covers that period as well. So the sooner our site comes forward, the quicker the land will be available, and we'll ensure it's available for us as long as needed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Butler. I think that probably, sorry, Miss Ashton, I can see you've got your hand up again, or is it an oversight?
No, it's just a point relating to Mr. Butler's comment. Just to point out that the land that Mr. Butler is referring to, we'll come on to on the next point, and that's to discuss whether exceptional circumstances exist to release that land. But also just to ask if Mr. Butler has seen the submission that the Greekland Academy have submitted, where they are stating that the land that Mr. Butler is suggesting to expand the school is not in support of, and the school is disappointed that the council hasn't liaised with them on this matter, because they are saying that actually their preferable means of expansion is on the other side of the school, not on the land that Mr. Butler has just mentioned. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I think that moves us on nicely then to the next bullet point, which is looking at that eastern field. And thank you, Mr. Butler, for raising your points and confirming from your perspective that it's still available. I'd like to just start though by getting the council's position, the council's overview on that field and what your view is, please. Mr. Seaman, you've put your camera on, that's good. I assumed it would be you rather than Mr. Morse. Because obviously just sort of backtracking in a bit of the history, at a previous stage 2 hearing session, we did discuss this field, and I confirmed afterwards that I had concerns about the access coming along the south, and the council subsequently confirmed that there was no other alternative access to housing. So at that stage, I guess the issue of education provision has been raised. Obviously, we have Barretts who are willing for it to be used for education, but on the other hand, there is the information that Miss Ashton just referred to from Greetland Academy for the letter that they sent, which appears to indicate that they're not keen on expansion in that particular direction, if my reading of their letter is correct. So, Mr. Seaman, if you can just sort of give me the council's position and views as you see it.
Yes, thank you, Ma'am. So yes, as you outlined, in the light of the stage 2 hearings, there was an acceptance that that certainly as it currently stands, it's not feasible to provide an acceptable access to that eastern field. In terms of whether or not there's an argument that it should be reserved for school expansion. I was also led to understand, and I think it was probably via Mr. Morse, that the school weren't keen on that eastern field on account of its gradient. So when we add that to what Mr. Morse was explaining around the scale of need and the time scale for that need, and also the different options that exist, certainly our position is that it wouldn't be appropriate to reserve that land for school expansion through the local plan. So that obviously leaves the question of what then should happen to that field, and I guess fundamentally, should it remain in the green belt or should it be removed from the green belt? And ultimately, we felt that was a slightly balanced issue with sort of arguments both ways. Ultimately, we've come down to the view, though, that that it should be included amongst the minor changes to the green belt in order to provide a clear and strong greenbelt boundary, and therefore we consider that there are exceptional circumstances to remove that land from the greenbelt. But as I say, we did feel it was a slightly balanced issue.
Okay, so sorry, just to confirm then, what are the exceptional circumstances to
well,
remove?
it's the need to, when you look at it on the map, and you look at the geography of the area and the beck running along the bottom of the site, we felt that retaining the green belt as currently drafted provides a stronger boundary than you would otherwise have. That was the argument. And as I say, that it's a balanced argument, but clearly the need to provide a strong, enduring boundary to the greenbelt is regarded as the exceptional circumstances.
Okay. So, and in terms of, just to clarify as well, where, I mean, obviously, in terms of your the housing requirement update in January 2020 version of the map, on that map it shows not only the eastern field, but also effectively the land to the south of that, you know, to the north side of the river, also being removed from the green belt, doesn't it?
Yes, it shows the green belt. Sorry, it shows the green belt boundary. And sorry, I haven't got the plan in front of me, but it shows the green belt boundary, as I recall, following the river, with with the developable area not going as far as the river, because we had quite extensive discussions at stage 2 about the flooding issues. And I mean, the basic form of the site is you have the river, you have a bit of a sort of level area which will naturally flood, and then an escarpment, and then the site rises to the main road. So we were looking at the site, and yes, there is that sort of escarpment that runs along the southern edge of the developable area, but we didn't feel that was particularly strong, because it was really, compared with a river, which you can draw a hard line against, that struck us as the clearest and sort of strongest boundary to draw to the green belt.
Okay. I'm sorry, there's a van outside, so I'm just going to shut the window. Okay, so obviously I've heard what you've said, Mr. Seaman. So you don't consider the river valley itself in its entirety to form a sort of a holistic whole then, as part of the green belt, and have value in that regard? You're saying that your priority is the defensible boundary of the river, and you think that's the key issue? Yes,
ma'am. I mean, it can be it can be argued in different ways. In terms of maintaining the pleasant visual character of the valley, and as you observed at stage 2, the escarpment sort of forming the edge of the developable area, that can be addressed by identifying it as outside the developable area, and then as part of planning applications that come forward, we will be looking for appropriate landscaping treatment, potentially enhancements to public access and the like. So that objective can be achieved through the sort of the mechanisms of how the developable area is drawn and how planning applications are treated. We very much felt that from the point of view, the particular perspective of Greenbelt policy, that the prime issue was achieving that strong boundary. Now, as I say, it is an issue that you could argue in different ways, but a number of us put our heads together, and that was the view that we came to.
Okay. Now I can see the viewpoint that it can be argued in different ways. I think probably from my perspective is that because we've had the debate since about the road, linking the eastern field, and I basically wrote to you and said I didn't think that was an appropriate location for a road. The inclusion of that southern area, I'm not sure why that southern area it needs to be included within the site, within the red boundary for the site. It's not part of the development site. The eastern field isn't there. It's not part of the development site. So effectively, the exceptional circumstances, that it's part of a housing scheme that's going to facilitate the Eastern Field coming forward, etc. That's dropped away. Those exceptional circumstances don't exist. And the other aspect is that, obviously when changes are being made to the greenbelt, as you know, one of the key questions is, well, what's changed to make that change? What circumstances? Certainly when I come to write my reports on greenbelt areas, I have to basically say, well, what's changed? Why is this change happening? Obviously, when it's an allocation, there's a clear sort of has to be demonstrated need. When it's a minor change, it tends to be a tweak and an OS error, or new buildings, or something of that nature. So, as you can see, from my perspective, I suppose I'm struggling to work out what the justification is.
And
slightly different perspective to you, I guess.
Yeah, and to be honest, we're perfectly comfortable with an alternative with the way you're viewing it, Mum. That's not an issue from the council's perspective. We just looked at it and tried to come to a conclusion, and we certainly have no issue with your perspective on it. So we'd comfortably fall in line with that.
Okay. Yes. No. I appreciate it. It's not totally clear cut. Okay, so I'll just invite other participants, if you wish to comment at this stage on the issue of exceptional circumstances and that eastern area, and actually the southern area of the allocation boundary as well. If you can raise your hand now. Miss Ashton, would you like to come back in, please?
Hello. I'm very surprised and shocked and disappointed by what Mr. Seaman has just suggested. It appears as though the council wants to remove land from the green belt wastefully instead of minimising the release of green belt land, which it sets out in its policy to remove green belt under EV09. It's not just any piece of green belt, it's a piece of green belt that is well used by the community for its recreational purposes because of the public right of way. Another thing to take into consideration is that there is starting to become more and more of a coalescence between West Vale and Greatland, and this piece of green belt is serving as it separates Greatland and West Vale. Even though there isn't a road going through it, it is a public right of way, and it separates the two settlements. And I also wonder how Mr. Seaman is establishing greenbelt boundaries on pieces of land where there aren't any rivers. I do not support the argument that's been put forward to suggest that there are exceptional circumstances to remove either the land to the east of the school, which is area B of the site, or the south of the land. I think both parcels of land should be retained within the green belt, because the purpose that Mr. Seaman is suggesting that the land would serve if it was within a site is the purpose that it currently serves now. It's open space, it's used for recreation, people walk down there, it enhances the well-being both physically and mentally of the community. And along the south side of Saddleworth Road, the council is proposing to remove a vast swathe of green belt. And I think the approach that Mr. Seaman has just put forward is very reckless and very greedy. I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Ashton. Mr. Cook, would you like to come back in now as well?
Yes, Madam Inspector. I won't take up too much of your time because I think a lot of it has already been said by Mr. Seaman. So I think he accepts that the land now to the east, the council have not met their responsibility to demonstrate exceptional circumstances. I think that's all that can be said on that. And I think they have to prove that, and they haven't done it. So they've not been able to demonstrate exceptional circumstances for releasing that land from the Greenbelt. And I think the argument that Mr. Seaman makes with respect to the boundaries, I think it's in some respects it's a circular argument. It's very circular, that argument. You know, it's saying, you know, there's a strong Greenbelt boundary that exists, so let's not change it. So I mean, I couldn't fully understand what Mr. Seaman was saying, whether he was saying he was going to change the boundaries or whether he was leaving them as they were. But in any event, if my understanding of the national planning policy framework is right, and Madam Inspector, yours will be far superior to mine, so I don't need to give you any lessons in that. But my understanding is that exceptional circumstances must exist to justify changes to Greenbelt boundaries. That have to be more than the arguments that the council have made. There must be some other additional things, as you rightly pointed out. So that's why I would like to suggest that the council haven't fulfilled its responsibility in that respect. You might want to correct me on that, but that's certainly my understanding. I'm not an expert in this area, but I'm a councillor, and I'm concerned to hear the council making that argument. So that was really all I wanted to say on that, Madam Inspector. But I think they've not fulfilled their duty to show that exceptional circumstances exist. They haven't really got an argument for that. Just the other points I wanted to make, and this may or may not be relevant, but I think as well the council haven't fulfilled their duty to discuss with neighbouring authorities whether they could accommodate some of the identified need. There is a statement of common ground with the Leeds City region, but I've not been able to find one for Rochdale Borough Council or Oldham Metropolitan Borough Council. They are councils which are located very close, not too far from the sites that we're discussing. So there's no statement of common ground. I don't know. They mention in EV09 that they've basically sort of dismissed the need to discuss with these adjacent local authorities in EV09. They sort of say, well, the Pennines is in the way, and it's Greenbelt all around Greater Manchester, so we've not really discussed anything with these other authorities, but I think they would need to. Otherwise, I can't see again how they're, complying with their requirements to justify removing to justify the entire site, the entire LP 0177 site. So I just wanted to make that point as well, Madam Inspector.
Okay. Well, I won't ask the council to respond on that issue, just because I don't think you were here at the stage 1 or stage 2.
No, I wasn't. No.
Where I mean, it's an important point you've raised, but we have already had quite extensive debates about the duty to cooperate and about.
Okay. All right, that's fine. Yeah, I missed that.
No, exactly. That you've come in, at a quite late date to.
Yeah. No, appreciate that, Madam Inspector. Thank you for the correction on that. And that was pretty much all I had to say. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Okay, and Mr. Butler, would you like to turn on your camera, please?
Thank you, ma'am. Just wanted to say that we do support the council's position that there are a variety of options available in the area for meeting pupil numbers over the course of the plan period. Our offer for that land being available for educational use was only if needed or required, and we're more than happy to maintain that through discussions as part of any application that comes forward with the council, should it be required in due course or over the plan period. And just to confirm again that we're content with the newly defined net developable area for homes for the allocation, and that is what our pre-application submissions have been on that basis too. So thank you.
Okay, thank you for confirming that, Mr. Butler. Right, I don't think I've got any further questions on item 5, so I'm just going to check through my list just to make sure, so just bear with me. No, I think, right, we've covered everything as far as I wanted to under item 5. I've got no further questions on the issue. So in that case, let's move on to item 6. Does anyone have any other issues they wish to raise on the agenda? If so, please raise your hand now. Mr. Butler, you're first.
Sorry, ma'am, I forgot to lower it. I'll do that now. Apologies.
Okay. In that case, Mrs. Bullen, over to you.
Thank you, Ma'am. Yeah, it was just really a further comment in relation to the proposed new Woodhouse Garden Suburb Primary School, which is now shown as a two-form entry school on the feasibility at CC 120. And it also states that it will be catering for the wider Brick House area. It states that a third of children will be coming from elsewhere, from off the Garden Suburb site. So, I mean, Mr. Dunbavin helpfully provided an indication of how the school would be developed this morning in terms of the incremental form provision. It would also be useful if we could have some confirmation as to which areas the school is intended to be catering for, and whether the delivery outline this morning included those additional pupils from outside the site, or whether it was just in relation to the anticipated numbers on the site itself. That's what I wanted to ask. Thank you.
I'm really sorry, Mrs. Bullen, you just cut out there. It's obviously late technical issues. Can you just repeat your question for me? I'm sorry about that.
Where shall I go from?
You said about Woodhouse as a two-form entry school. You said a third is coming from elsewhere.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Yeah. So Mr. Dunbavin helpfully provided an indication this morning. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Helpfully provided an indication of how the school would be developed in terms of the incremental form provision. But it would be useful if we could have some confirmation as to which areas the school is intended to be catering for in terms of that wider area, in terms of I suppose, providing a sustainable school as well, and whether the delivery outlined this morning in terms of the incremental form included these additional pupils that are coming from outside the site as well. That was the question.
What your question is, are you saying which areas of Brick House will those pupils come from?
Yeah, well, it might be beyond, it could be from Kirklees as well. So which areas, presumably I don't know who's come up with this, but presumably the pupils are coming from elsewhere, the third of pupils are from elsewhere. It would be useful to know where they're coming from. But critically, it's whether the form provision caters for that additional third of pupils coming from elsewhere off the site.
Okay, it might be Mr. Morse from the council, I'm guessing, who would answer this afternoon. Mr. Morse, are you able to assist Mrs. Bullen on her question?
Yes, I mean, it's a difficult question to answer in that in calculating how many additional places we need. We've looked at developments in the area. These two schools aren't exclusively for the garden suburbs, although they will predominantly serve those garden suburbs. In terms of parental preference, I can only say make sweeping statements really. Generally, if a school is a good school or an outstanding school, local residents will want to go there, and they will travel to that local school. So there will certainly, when we create these new schools, be some knock-on domino effect, if you like. But we're trying to create overall additional capacity in the system as a consequence of new homes across the area exhausting the existing supply of provision. So we don't want to take a piecemeal approach of having lots and lots of minor expansions to schools where there's only maybe half a form of entry or less. We would obviously want to do it in the most sensible and economical way by targeting the two main contributors, if you like, as a location for the schools.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Morse. Okay, so just to summarise, oh sorry, Mr. Carlton, I've just seen your hand come up. Would you like to turn your camera on?
Good afternoon, Inspector. Yes, it's Jason Carlton, local participant. Ma'am, I did want to just briefly refer to CC 119 and 120, if that's okay with you. I put some submissions in against this, and there were some particular points that I feel the council may welcome the opportunity to, or the site promoters may welcome the opportunity to elaborate on. And so there are some specific points about the the principles that are being adopted for new buildings coming forward. And I'm referring to the BREEAM classification, and because what did concern me was that the assessments had been done to the 2014 BREEAM assessment, when that's moved on and there is a 2018 standard now. That will have clearly, as the standards improve, that brings additional benefits, or is looking at different controls. So I did wonder if you wanted to invite the council or the site promoter to potentially explain why they were using an old assessment when a new standard has become available. And just picking up on the point that was just raised, I don't see any. There was scant information about the sustainable transport options. So if we're building in good communities and we're looking at environmental sustainability, I would expect the BREEAM consideration really to be above. I think the minimum should be excellent. And secondly, what can the clarification be sought about the sustainable transport options on these sites, please? Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, so Mr. Carlton, your first point, you referred to a different document, so this isn't to do with education infrastructure at all then?
Well, it is, yes, because this is about the provision of the schools. These are the feasibility reports for the schools at Woodhouse and Thornhills.
Sorry, I'm just trying to find the library. I don't live by numbers. I'm trying to look up the titles so I can just remind myself. So was it 120, you said?
It was 119 and 120, if I've got my numbers correct. It was the feasibility reports on the Thornhills and the Woodhouse schools.
Okay, and your question was about the BREEAM.
Yes, so the BREEAM requirement, that first of all, it's been assessed to the 2014 assessment rather than the 2018 standard. And I have a general point here, and this is my professional background now, that where you get a new standard, although they're not retrospective, and it's not a great idea to try and apply them retrospectively on something that's new, I would certainly expect the current standard to be applied. So question number one is really why it's been applied to the 2014 standard rather than the new standard. And it may help to put this into context for people who are possibly not aware of it, that there has been some realignment about how these classifications work. So that was my first question. It might be easier to take them in separately, ma'am.
Okay, can I get the council to respond to that specific question then about the use of the 2014 BREEAM standard rather than a more up-to-date one that exists now?
Thank you, ma'am. Yes, I'm mindful that it is a very detailed question on quite a detailed piece of work, and the officer who commissioned and oversaw that piece of work isn't on the call this afternoon. So if it's okay, we will provide a response in writing.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. I appreciate that. That is a slightly different question to what we've got on the agenda today. So that's fine as far as I'm concerned. Mr. Carlton, is that appropriate for you?
Absolutely, ma'am, it is, yes. And I wonder at the same time, would they like the opportunity to pick up on the sustainable transport options as well?
Okay, would you like to just repeat your question for me on sustainable transport?
Yes, certainly. So there was, the way I looked at this is that there were some potential conflicts with the local plan evidence. The study was suggesting that all users will be from the surrounding neighbourhood. But as we've just heard now, there's other evidence that if we're looking at seeking funding from other schools in Brighouse, or that residents may wish to send their pupils to other schools, I do feel that perhaps there's an opportunity to give a bit more information about what the sustainable transport options for both sites are going to be, because that intake could be wider than the immediate, as we've just heard from Mr. Morse, it could be wider than the immediate developments.
Okay. Mr. Seaman, did you want to comment on that question, please? the sort of the sustainability. I think it's the catchment area, isn't it, for the school, and the sustainable transport options. I think Martin's interested in.
Yes, that's. I mean, again, that's one where I think it would be difficult to provide a response on the hoof, because obviously we need to have regard to the catchment, and I think the issue of sort of wider sustainable transport, particularly in the context of the A641 corridor, is one where we would take the advice of Mr. Spensley, who again is not on the call. So we can answer those questions. It's going to be a case of speaking to a few different colleagues and putting an answer together.
Okay, that's fine. I've added that to the list of actions then. Okay, so final call. Any other issues that people wish to raise on the subject of education infrastructure? No. Okay, so just pulling together then, in terms of what I've heard this afternoon. I think in terms of the document CC121, I've obviously said, I've asked the council if they could confirm which trajectory was used, and at the same time, if they can just check, the differences potentially, are there any significant differences? If there have been tweaks, haven't there, in the current trajectory that we talked through this morning since the ones last year, are there any implications for the education infrastructure modelling? If there are big differences, then can I ask that an updated version is published? At the same time, obviously we talked through the light cliff and shelf error that you said was an error and then would result in changes to the shortfall for that particular area. So I'd want an updated document put on the examination library with those correct figures. I mean, obviously they were referred to today by yourself, Mr. Morse. I think you said one form entry, but I think if the workings are there and people can see actually how you've gone through the figures and come up with a one form entry answer, I think that should be included in the examination library as well. Then we obviously touched on the issue of LP 177 in Greetland and the issue of the eastern field and the southern field. And I think, as I indicated earlier, my position at present time is I think that there probably aren't exceptional circumstances demonstrated sufficiently by the council to justify the release of those fields from the green belt to the east and the south. The housing and the education issues appear to have dropped away, and there doesn't appear to be any other evidence before me of exceptional circumstances in that regard. So that would be my sort of like view on that issue at this present point in time, without prejudice to my final report, of course. And then obviously we just talked through a final action point where the council has agreed to respond to Mr. Carlton in writing on two different issues. So that's about it. Before we close the session, does the council have any practical issues or housekeeping matters it wishes to raise?
No, thank you, Mum. I think we've covered everything. Thank you. Okay.
Right, so it just remains for me to thank everyone who has participated this afternoon. Thank you for all of your contributions. It's obviously quite a technical subject, the education infrastructure projections, but we've got through it in good time. So thank you very much. The hearing session is now closed and you can log off.